Okay, can you just confirm you're aware that we're recording?
I am aware we're recording and I consent.
Great, thank you. Background for anyone listening, I recently did a deep dive on cults. A friend of mine said, oh, you have to meet this other friend and talk to him. He was in a cult. It'll be really interesting. And it turns out Duncan gets that request a lot. So his compromise was he was happy to talk to me, but he wanted to record it so that he could stop having the conversation. This is not going to be the most polished recording ever because neither of us are really optimized for that, but we thought it was better to create something than nothing. So with that said, this is Duncan Horst, and please tell us about your cult.
Thank you very much. Full disclosure, I didn't actually start one, although the impulse to build a magic house and have everybody meditating and doing yoga and all that has been in my slipstream for a long time. I joined one. It was based out of Bali, Indonesia. I was active in it from roughly 2012 through 2014 for a period of 2.5 years. I would consider it a yoga cult. It was based around one charismatic leader, a female. She was 45 through 47 for the duration of her stay there. And I was, I think, 25, 26 through 28. So there's your age ranges. You'll find that's roughly typical for a lot of these groups, like a charismatic leader in their 40s and followers in their 20s, for obvious reasons that I'll get into later. It was a small group, and you were saying that you liked understanding the small ones. I mean, we were all basically recruited by the leader of this group. It was about 12 people in person at max, 20 people to 25 people in the extended slipstream and online forum and stuff, based in Bali, Indonesia. So not everybody has the resources to just hang out there their whole existences. People would go away and work and stay connected and then come back for deep dives. And yeah, it was definitely a transformative experience. I can definitely see areas where I benefited. There was definitely a cost that I paid as well. And I'm one of the fortunate ones in that when I add up the pros and the cons, I think, and there's no way of knowing, but I think my life was made better for the time that I spent there. And that's due to a lot of good fortune and some hard work, but not everybody is so lucky, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think on the whole, they probably weren't. So I've always been a bit of a gambler, and this was one that worked out for me, though I can see that it didn't work out for everybody.
Oh, so this is already fascinating. One of the things I think gets lost in a lot of talking about cults is people will acknowledge that people don't join for no reason, but there's not a lot of talk about the benefits people get. So can we dig into that? Like, what kind of benefits were you getting? And to the extent you're aware, what were other people getting from it?
Okay. I mean, before I jump into the specifics, can I do a little bit of a broader thing on just like
Please.
saying why I think I like that certain cults exist. Like I like that energies and relational styles and group styles and community styles exist that are beyond the spectrum of what is normalized in like late capitalistic society.
Mm-hmm.
And, before a culture is a cult, But these are environments based on some kind of attempt to reach escape velocity of the gravity of the current world, right? So like you have to have this and this and maintain it over time. And whether a pop star trying to get, or where you're an atomic physicist trying to lock the powers of the atom, or you're trying to crack quantum computer, trying to write the next great American novel, or arraying people in a way that unlocks their core basic energies and transforms them over time, it's going to take a lot of force, direction, devotion applied in a level that like most people just will not be into, you know? That's why you have a lot of creatives and scientists and all that in seclusion trying to work at it, especially in like human interactions. Like there's a lot of reasons based on the way the mind works, based on the way that the body works, to need to have these periods of like deep practice to result in meaningful changes on the way you perceive reality. And it's a bit of a, I won't say it's a bit of a crapshoot, whether those changes are healthy and beneficial or whether they're not. There's a lot of faith involved in that when going beyond the spectrum of anything you've ever known. So I will just say as like a qualifier, I like the fact that these experiments are happening. I think we need more visibility and more disclosure rather than less to allow these experiments to happen with a good control group, you know, with a good oversight and with like full like going on, and here are half a dozen groups that are doing it, and here are their findings, and here are their results. Because the damage, I think, happens when one charismatic leader puts off the outside world. Happen is that people don't get engaged with these groups if nothing's going on, you know? So it's there is something that can happen in these groups that is very, very real. And I want to emphasize that as well. And it's much more likely to happen in the smaller groups than the larger corporate ventures, you know. So that said, can you
if I can,
rephrase the previous question? I just wanted to underline that.
Yeah, just to give a little context on where I'm coming from, I don't think like cults wouldn't be there if they weren't serving a need. And to the extent I had a goal with my deep dive, it was identify the behaviors and practices that will differentially get you the best parts of cult and push away the worst.
We can get through this all. Where do you want to steer?
Yeah, let's go back to what benefits were you getting from this organization?
Got it. The biggest benefit, there were a few benefits I would say. One was kind of centering and stabilization of my nervous system. So I had my first what we call spiritual awakening. It was a mixed case. It was when I was 21 years old, and I took way too many psychedelic mushrooms for my first trip in a place in Amsterdam where the set and setting were just about as worst as I could have selected them, and the dose was about 3 times larger than it should have been. And so I had to withdraw from school afterwards. Like my aura, or whatever you can call it, was just completely blown. I was having all these experiences of feeling energies and literally seeing spirits and like having connections and conversations and all of the intense emotions passing through me that I had no context for and couldn't understand. And the only context there for me, other than a diagnosis and pills for the rest of your life, was you're going through these practices, stop eating meat, get yoga, figure out how to stabilize your nervous system yourself. Quickly learned that I couldn't talk to people in the Western science paradigm without being branded a deficient mentality, like chemicals to make the weird feelings stop, So that's what got into the spiritual field in the first place, seeing beyond the physical. From there, it was once I once I started eating, I started, of course, coming into contact with a different crowd. And I met one Tamika in Brooklyn who had a pretty deep connection with. When I went to basically when I went to teach abroad in China, we stayed in contact, and she invited me to come join this collective. But the thing is, like, I was still experiencing a great deal of flux in this. I experienced these like really elated, expansive highs where I would feel a merger with reality itself. I would experience these beings who seemed to be, external to me. Like it would happen. I would feel my spine opening up. I would feel energies rising from the base of my spine up to my crown, and then I would have these interactions. There were a couple out of body experiences. There were a lot of energy running through me, and there was a capacity to move that energy into the systems of others as well. So it was some really cool stuff, but I didn't have too much control over that. And it seemed to be alternating with like a lot of crushing lows, dark night of the soul, severe depression, ability to get out of bed because I was just processing so much through my. So I had a little context for what I was experiencing, and the less context you have, the more your mind can churn around these things and get fixated. Like a lot of the times with depression, say 10% of it is your physiological symptoms, and 90%, the thing that keeps it going for weeks or months rather than just days, is your mind being fixated on that and going into a retreat rather than facing something directly, processing it, and allowing that to be a basis for growth. So, long story a little bit shorter there, the greatest benefit that I got was getting connected with a group of people and with a teacher who could induce states that were higher than any kind of like hypomanic or manic energy, and lower than any kind of depression. And if you're anywhere near healthy, the most effective form of therapy is exposure therapy. And that goes for whether you're into really extreme psychedelic practices or sexual practices, spiritual practices, physical practices. The greatest game right on the edge of your competence zone. It keeps growing you. So the repeated exposure to these extreme states was beneficial for me in both elated states and depressed states, and allowing me to disconnect from the flux of that and just connect and relate to the energy of those states. Because
and
by connecting to the energy, that was what?
And I just want to make sure I understand. You were having these fluctuations before you hooked up with the cult, but part of what the cult gave you was sort of a structure for exposure therapy to experience these states, possibly while more supported, and sort of acclimate to them.
Right. And there are caveats there. So I was much more energetically. What the cult explicitly didn't give was emotional support. So it was emotionally traumatizing, but energetically very, very supportive. And over time you gain the nuance to understand the distinction between these forms, like the group itself, at least advertised as like a Kashmiri Shaivite branch of Tantra. So, like Shiva worship, you're worshiping consciousness and energy and their union. So like kind of a still point of focus within the self, allowing you to interact with huge energies that the world and all of its structures. Like going beyond thinking about them to internalizing them in your body to actually feeling them, to experiencing that. The more you can center within yourself, the more you can pass through you like a hollow tube and interact on the base layers of reality. And like one of the mind's defense mechanisms for something that's too big for it to control is to just think of it, to try and capture it with the mind itself. So like there needs to be some going beyond the mind in order to digest, dissolve, integrate some of these massive energies. So that's one of the things that we did. But like in that system, there are 5 interlocking bodies, right? The physical body or the food body that takes in physical matter and produces energy. Then the prana body that's like energy, like think of it as your central nervous system. And it takes in energy, produces emotions. Then you have like the lower mental or emotional body that takes in these emotions and produces thoughts. Then the wisdom body that takes in thoughts and produces wisdom. And then the bliss body. Like if your wisdom is right, you just get a showering of bliss from the universe. And it's kind of like the idea is if you can align all of these bodies correctly, they just create a top down and a bottom up flow of matter going into spirit, spirit going into matter, like open tube of bliss coming down. Like when we could engineer that or just like relax and release and allow it to happen, some incredible states. But like that's part of actual video. I'm not talking about and um, you get amazed and you're dealing with those and result like trauma or sexual trauma or that it gets dense. So this subtle feel extreme thing to say if the goal of a group is to remove the traumas you've ever had and the leader holds them authority for those traumas and themselves as if things triggered then it can be trigger you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it has to be incredibly careful all the levels. So it takes a lot, which is to say, I think the audacity.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second.
Ask
My audio quality
it actually is.
has tanked. So I'm going to try going on to data, and that might interrupt the call.
Worries. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are reconnected, and hopefully this will be a higher quality connection.
Sure. Let me know how this does this sound any.
So far, it is much better.
Are we okay, cool. And feel free to interrupt me at any time. I know I can just keep talking sometimes, so
Yeah, when I listen to podcasts, I always like when the guests ramble. Yeah. When I listen to podcasts, I always like it when the guests ramble more than when the hosts interrupt. So I'm erring on the side of not doing that. But I appreciate the affordance. That's also why I'm not making any of those like noises I would do in actual conversation, because it annoys the hell out of me when podcast hosts do that.
Yeah.
To go back to what we were talking about, it sounds like
let's continue.
Yeah. So you were being offered something incredibly valuable. With everything you know now, was there a healthier way for you to get that thing? Like either some sort of platonic ideal of how you would have gotten that thing or actually available in the real world?
That's a great question.
Another way of putting that would be,
I mean, there's absolutely a way, right?
okay.
No, go on.
Well, it's not obvious to me. Could you have gotten
the
all
desire.
that? Oh, I apologize to listeners for the lag. Could you have gotten all that energetic healing without the emotional trauma? Was there a way to do it that would have been emotionally supported or untraumatic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there was.
Okay. What do you think that would have looked like?
That would look like the devotion to regular practice coming from the relationship to nature itself, rather than to one teacher or lead to whom I was like subservient and bowing to as an intermediary between myself and nature, myself and spirit, myself and reality. And that relationship of the intermediary as God, as self, is part of the secret sauce of a lot of these traditions, and with good reason. Like, it's very efficient to make that projection, because that's the way that the brain is shaped. Half the neural we have our relation to other people. It's kind of harder to bow to a mountain or a tree than it is to bow to somebody else and have your thalamus and all of your connections that are designed to make you a healthy member of a tribe, light up. But it is possible. So if I were able to muster that level of devotion, that led me practicing for an hour and a half every morning for a year and a half straight, if I were to do that in myself based on a very real connection to nature, then it would probably come at a slower pace, the pace of transformation, but it would also come with my own motivation and integrity and my own karma. And I can get into that more specifically on my own motive power and my own energy and volition. So none of the hangups that led this teacher to, practice for like hours and hours, like on a rock in a river, I mean, later we learned that she was actually abused by her own teacher physically. There were, were drugs involved too, and all of these things were designed to keep her in her center in relation to really extreme stimuli. Like kind of a left hand practice. But that intensity doesn't go away, right? And if you're a teacher, you have that level of intensity, you think you processed it all, but you haven't really. That intensity gets funneled into your students.
Right.
That view of life as this intense process where the strong survive. And that's how I actually got out. My nervous system, after 2.5 years of this, stopped functioning properly, and I stopped being able to process energy and thus process and digest food. And there were like 4 months where I just wasn't eating because my liver couldn't filter out stuff, and I got candida overgrowth and blood parasites and heavy metal poisoning and stuff like that. My blood platelets were flat under the mic, and there were like buggies swimming around in there. And so I had to just like do a really deep fast, a lot of my own meditation and disconnection, and just no contact with anybody from those groups, because I literally couldn't process it anymore. Like just making eye contact or even reading the writings of this person, my eyes would burn, my throat would close up, and I would get a stabbing pain between my liver and gallbladder. Like my body was just telling me, you've had enough. You have to stop this. We actually can't take it anymore.
So there was something of a feedback loop.
I think there's a happy medium.
There's a thing I've noticed in a
Yeah.
lot of cults I've read about, that it's very hard to bring up a small problem. Either they're completely suppressed or they're treated as very large problems in ways that actually inhibit bringing things up. Uh, does that sound familiar at all? Um,
Could you repeat that? I lost a few words in there.
yeah. So, a thing I have noticed is that cults make it hard to have sort of proportionate feedback loops, that you can't have a small problem and then have a modest reaction to it, because it will be suppressed, which means things either like things stay suppressed and people stay in the cult, or they explode in some sort of emotionally or energetically violent fashion, where they just can't anymore. Does that sound familiar? Does that match your experience?
Yes, it does. I mean, total obedience to the leader was what was being asked. And when that wasn't granted, and that this person is like the alpha female or the alpha male, or like it was interesting because she had both components, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We can get into that. But basically, if there wasn't due deference granted, it would escalate to emotional or even physical violence, with just like put down a blast of negative energy that could actually knock somebody off their feet, or induce depression, or like a physical slap or a kick or something like that. And somebody got really confrontational, and that was seen as what was necessary to awaken like the inner beast. Like the leader at least claimed to not appreciate the deference. It's like, get up and step into the firing line. Like, get up. Like, I don't give a fuck about this self that bows and breaks to me. Like, that's the point. You're notice that that self that is a false beta human to my alpha, and just keep digging until you find your alpha that can stand toe to toe with me. And I don't give a fuck about your beta. Like, I don't give a fuck about your false personality construct. So
Mm-hmm.
it's this is going to be like a higher abstraction layer, right, than most of the cults that you've heard of, because nominally this person knows a thing or two about what's going on, you know, isn't content to just rest as the alpha, essentially just wants other people to play with, you know. And to like the tragedy of it all, because I actually see and feel the purity in that, you know, the warrior spirit in that. Like, I do actually see it. I don't see it as a scam or a game that we went through. I see this as this person like really looking for somebody that she can stand with and grow with and nurture, but just understanding how to move and integrate through all the trauma that she'd experienced, and having like 25 years of yoga experience intensity, and not believing in the narratives of society, like having a kind of warrior mentality that is, you know, all but eclipsed by our current civilization. So it's like what I'm saying is like there's a lot right there, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't only about glorifying this one person as the alpha. It's
Right.
just the nature of the techniques resulted in a lot of conditioning and a lot of feedback loops, because like to stand up to this person meant being attacked, and with enough of you being attacked, you just get conditioned. You get conditioned to either obey, or you get conditioned that glorifies emotional and physical violence, as a means of approval seeking, which we eventually all did. You know, we were taught to each other for approval. We were taught to out practice each other and like sit for longer in meditation and push ourselves harder on the yoga mats and dissect each other's personalities or false identity religiously and rigorously, and you know, until there was nothing left that was quote unquote false, you know, or weak or whatever it was. But those definitions didn't come from us; they came from her.
Right.
So it's still
another one of my
that's all I
theories.
have to say on that strand.
One of my pet theories is being a guru is a person who believes and is treated as the source of truth without peer is really bad for you. That every human being both needs checks because they will go off the rails on their own, but also humans are designed to need peers, and it's very lonely and isolating being treated as a demigod. Do you think things would have gone differently if she had either had one peer who she thought was like genuinely her equal, or was working in a tradition where that the assumption was there were peers somewhere, at least historically?
Yes, I think unequivocally so. You know, I sigh because, like, looking back on it, there was not one living person who she claimed as her equal, other than random Indian yogis sitting under a banyan tree, or you know, guardians of various temples. Yeah. She herself was Indian, so you know, we Westerners were held as like a sub stock. Like you can hope to that level of practice. You're probably not going to get there, but you know, it's really cute that you're trying. The not cute, but the that Eastern chauvinism, both Indian and especially Tibetan Buddhist. But we don't need to look into that. That was a big part of the Shambhala.
I actually have a follow-up question
sure.
on that. I'm stealing this from.
Great. Do you want to do it now, or?
Yeah, I don't think this follow-up will take that long. Stealing from David Chapman, he has pointed out that while lots of Eastern sects require a lot of obedience from adherents, they're also in a culture that knows what to expect from them and will push back if they deviate from it, in a way that when Eastern gurus go over to the West, they are not. They get to be the authority on themselves and their tradition in a way they wouldn't in their ancestral village.
Yes, absolutely. They're not questioned, they're not questioned, and the crazy wisdom justification that anything goes. Like, I will do anything and everything that it takes to engender enlightenment, which means if people truly believe that as students, that anything that the teacher does is the emanation of God speaking through, like beneficial for the breakdown of their limited conception of reality and expansion into like a God self, which is true. Like, I'm looking out the window at this gorgeous mountain in Colorado. It's like that mountain could be a portal for God too, or like a lunatic street. I could look that differently, and like triggering my revulsion to their behavior could see divinity there. So we have it on at any time with anyone. It's just when you get that other person constantly, you're feeding them with your energy. You're amplifying them. You're opening all the doors of yourself to them, thus enhancing the capacity that you're going to have an experience and then associate it with them. And because you've had an experience and associated it with them, you open even more and give them even more deference and even more energy, which, if only fresh gets through, actually makes them more powerful. And it it amplifies their actual power, not just in your mind, capacity to produce these states and to live in this kind of stream of intuition and energy. So it's not an illusion. Like, a lot of these leaders have power that has been semi-voluntarily given to them by students, and the more students and the more people feel, the more to accumulate to actually induce these experiences, which then justifies people giving their power over to them, which continues to enhance their capacity to move energy. It's not all an illusion, but the effect of it is, it can be disempowering for the students that get left behind in this evolutionary. It's a little bit of a pyramid scheme at first.
Right. Do you think
the previous question
for there to be
yeah.
Is it possible for there to be a human healthy enough that being in that guru position without checks will go okay? Or is the process just inherently corrupting?
Well, I mean, you look at all the luminaries. Like, I'm at home right now with like Edge of Buddha. You have the figures of Christ. You have all these like perfected yogi types, who are just going to be held as like the mandala of their religion or tradition, and maybe the last even that. But there are a set amount of human experiences that we as humans can have, and there's a set amount of time that we serve. And like, after you've experienced, there's like variations on a theme. The ability to continue to accumulate and not spill temptation or that temptation is going to spill out in those ways. It keeps building. The energy keeps building. Then you get different challenges and different tasks and different, with enough energy, people just swarm around you. People find you. The world finds you. And so you either retreat further into the mountains or open a retreat center, and hawker wares or
Testing. Okay, I lost about the last 45 seconds of audio. Testing. Well, something has gone wrong. Can you hear me? Okay, let's try restarting.